Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at 10 things you didn't know about the Gran Turismo series. Now before we get into the video, remember to check out the Patreon, join the Discord while you're at it, like and subscribe. Also the timestamps are on screen if you want to fast forward to a certain section of the video. But yeah, let's get into it. So the first thing that you probably didn't know about the Gran Turismo series is the birthday gifts. Now, did you know that since Gran Turismo 5 you actually get a birthday gift given to you by Polyphony in the form of a free car? This feature was introduced in GT5, which is when the series began to personalise the game a little bit more. However, this birthday gift idea has undergone some changes since then. In Gran Turismo 5, as you can see on the screen, you'd get a ticket, which functions like the roulette tickets in GT7. And this ticket would give you a car randomly selected from your birth year. However, in GT6 the ticket format no longer exists. You still get a car randomly selected from around your birth year this time, even if it's not the exact birth year. In GT7 the feature came back much like from GT6, but this time it's only cars from the dealership or cars newer than 2001. This feature does also exist in Gran Turismo Sports. On top of this, in GT7 you get birthday wishes from many of the characters from the campaign and even get some special birthday music. Don't worry though, the gifts are usually pretty good. Now moving on to the second thing you didn't know, and that is World War II cars. Did you know that there are actually cars from the Second World War in Gran Turismo? Most of the people who played GT7 will know about the Willys Jeep. You can get it from the mission races for getting all gold, and it's actually the cheapest car in the Legend dealership, only around 30,000 credits. Now, famously this car was used by the US military during World War II, over 600,000 cars were produced, and it was the first mass-produced four-wheel drive car. But did you know there was actually two more cars from World War II featured in Gran Turismo, which you may never have heard of? This time from the other side. I've talked about these two cars already in the slowest cars in Gran Turismo video, actually along with the Willys Jeep. Take a look at that video if you haven't already. These cars however feature in just GT5 and GT6, and they are the VW Kugelwagen and the Schwimmwagen. I hope I'm pronouncing them correctly. Let's start with the Kugelwagen. Now this car was used by Germany during the Second World War, and despite it being built by VW, it was actually designed by Porsche. Anyway, in GT6 this car can be bought for around 246,000 credits, and surprisingly it's one of the very few detailed cars, which means it has a fully kind of modelled interior. In GT5 this car can be won from the European Classic Car Championship in the Beginner League, so it's actually one of the very first cars you can win, and many of you who would have played GT5 would have in fact won this car. It has only 22 horsepower, and to be honest it isn't that useful in the game. Then 2 years later in 1944 came along the Schwimmwagen, and as you would expect this is the amphibious version of the previously mentioned Kugelwagen. It has similar stats and performance, but it's a bit more expensive at 625,000 credits. Despite the VWs never being in the same game as the Willys Jeep, it would be nice in the future to compare these cars to see which is actually the better car. It's worth noting that there are actually many other cars in the GT series designed and made during times of war, not just World War II. However, these cars were the only cars in the series used specifically for war. If you'd like to see me talking about cars made during the Second World War, leave a comment and I can do that video separately. Now we'll move on to some Gran Turismo records. So at number 3 we have the oldest car in the series. Now, the oldest car in the series is a tie between the Mercedes-Benz motor carriage and the Mercedes-Benz motor wagon, both of which only feature in GT4 and both of which from 1886. Number 2 spot however goes to the Ford Model T, made in 1915, nearly 30 years later, so the Mercedes clearly take the win for this one. Now number 4 will be the lightest car in the series. Now technically the karts from GT6 are the lightest, with the junior car only weighing 63 kg, but I wanted to include an actual car, and that record goes to the Caterham 7 Fireblade from 2002, which features from GT4 onwards. It weighs only 369 kg or 814 pounds. Now, while it only beats the second place, the Subaru 360, by a matter of a few kg, this car still does take the win. And don't think that this car is just a one-trick pony. It's a very fun car to drive, partially due to its low weight, and it can get you some use, being able to compete in many events, mainly the ones with restrictions on weight or size. like the World Compact Car Championship from GT4 for example. Number 5, the heaviest car in the series. So to go to the other end of the spectrum, we have to talk about the heaviest car in the whole series. That is the Jay Leno tank car featuring in GT4, 5 and 6. Now this thing weighs a whopping 3,500 kg or over 7,700 pounds. This is over 1 tonne heavier than second place, the Range Rover Stormer, and over 11 times heavier than the Caterham we talked about previously. As it happens, it also holds the record for the car with the biggest engine in the series at 29.3 litres. And it's actually one of the largest cars in the series dimension-wise as well. It's maybe the largest car, but since we don't have any official measurements, we can't compare them. Number 6. Cars with the same sound. And this is probably the favourite thing I've found out while researching this video, and it's probably my favourite one of the list. Now this is that many of the cars in the Gran Turismo series actually share the same engine sound, and these are cars that you would have never guessed sound the same. Now it's actually quite a big topic, so I wanted to save most of this for a part 2 video, or even for a separate video by itself, but I thought I would include some of these in this video. So back in the early games, when there were multiple versions of the same car, for example like 30 MX-5s, it made sense for duplicate cars to share the same sound file. This helped cut costs for polyphony, and it didn't really make much of a difference to the experience since they basically had the same engine anyway. But there are some unexpected cars that you would have never guessed sound the same. Now the first group of cars we'll talk about have a generic small displacement, small cylinder sound. This engine sound has been paired with many of the K cars in the series, but there is an outlier in this group. The Suzuki Alto Works is a well-known car that has this sound, but did you know this car sounds identical to the Renault 5? I've matched up the revs and slowed down the Renault slightly, but have a listen. Despite the Suzuki having half the capacity and having one less cylinder, for some reason they both sound identical. I must point out the Mazda AutoZam also shares that sound. Now the next one's a surprising one. Here we have a generic high revving race car sound. This sound belongs to the Alfa Romeo 155 touring car, but it sounds identical to the Peugeot 905B race car. Have a look. So despite the Peugeot having a V10 and the Alfa only being a V6, they do in fact have the same sound. I bet you didn't know that. Many other touring cars from the game share this sound, namely the Vauxhall Calibra touring car. Before we go any further, I would like to mention that this mainly applies to Gran Turismo 4, but this can be seen in other games as well. Finally, we have the most surprising one yet. For some reason, the majority of the first generation Mazda MX-5s all have the same engine sound as the Alfa Romeo Giulia Sprint from 1963 and the GTA version in 1965. Have a listen. To be fair, they both do have 1.6 litre inline 4s, but there is a 30-year gap between them. Still, didn't stop polyphony from recycling sounds. Now I'll move on to some more cars that are incorrect, but this time in the form of their stats. Number 7, the overpowered Vertigo. So yes, we'll be talking about the Gilet Vertigo. Now some of you may have seen this one before, but I'll point out for the ones that are new here. Now it's the only car from the Gilet manufacturer, and it's actually the only car from Belgium featured in the whole series, but that's not what we're looking at in particular. But that is the Vertigo from GT4 had a slight error in its stats. You see, the 1997 version of the Vertigo featured in Gran Turismo 3 and had a 3.6 litre V6 borrowed from Alfa Romeo, ironically similar to the 155 we talked about earlier. And is tuned to make 419 horsepower, despite the engine never producing more than 350 horsepower in real life. But then the 2004 version showed up in GT4 onwards, which increased its displacement to 3.8 litres using the same V6 engine borrowed from Alfa Romeo. Except this version apparently makes 900 horsepower, making it not only one of the most powerful cars in GT4, but also the most powerful naturally aspirated car in the game. However, this car doesn't really have the performance to match a car with 900 horsepower. All this power means it can't really get traction, resulting in a very slow 0 to 60, and a top speed of 198 miles an hour isn't really impressive for a car with 900 horsepower. But it was even worse in races. A combination of poor brakes, insufficient aerodynamics and a bad chassis meant that this car would lose when it raced against its competitors, and due to its power it often got placed with LMP cars. What's funny though is that Polyphony really thought this car had 900 horsepower. They even wrote a whole description about this car, praising the manufacturer for getting so much power out of the engine, and they carried on using these stats for a further 2 games up until GT6, when the car was later removed. Number 8. The faulty gearbox. So the next car or the car series we'll be talking about will be the Pagani Zonda and its faulty gearbox. There are 2 Zondas in particular that we'll be talking about, those being the Pagani Zonda C12 and the C12S, both appearing in Gran Turismo 3. So for some reason their top speed is capped, so let me explain. Let's take the C12S to start with. Despite having a 7 litre V12 making over 550 horsepower, its top speed is stuck at 152 miles an hour. It's not as if there's a limiter, the gearbox is genuinely set up as if this car can only just reach that speed. In real life however, this car can do over 208 miles an hour and even do 0 to 60 in less than 3.7 seconds. This is the same for the lesser powerful model, the C12, which is only able to manage 142 miles an hour, while being able to comfortably achieve over 180 miles an hour in real life. But what's even more interesting is that the Zonda LM edition from GT3 doesn't have this issue. This is all fixed in GT4 however, when their true speeds were unlocked. Nobody knows where this came from or why it was even the case. Now for number 9 we'll be talking about foreshadowing. So to see this we need to have a look at the Panos Esperante GT1 race car, which featured in GT3 to GT6. This is the only car made by the Panos manufacturer and it was quite a good car, but that's not what we're looking at here. On the front bumper of this car it features a logo for the old Road Atlanta Raceway, a racetrack which has only just been introduced as part of update 1.26 in Gran Turismo 7, when the panels had since been removed. Foreshadowing maybe? Number 10. Alternative fuel cars. Now we frequently hear talks about the shift to electric and hybrid cars in real life, and it's safe to say this change has been implemented in Gran Turismo as well. There are currently 27 hybrid and electric cars featured in the series, with GT7 having the highest amount of any game in the series of 14 electric and hybrid cars, just beating GT6 despite that game having over 2 times the total amount of cars. The rapid increase in the quantity of electric cars in GT games does in fact show a shift to electric cars, but we rarely talk about cars that are powered by things other than petrol or electric. So let's start with the most well-known alternative fuel, diesel. According to GT Wiki, diesels are best suited for endurance races and have red lines below 5,000 RPM. Naturally they favour torque rather than power. There are 13 diesel-powered cars in the Gran Turismo series, with 9 of them being variations of the Audi R18, R10 or the Peugeot 908. However, there are a couple of road cars as well. Firstly, the BMW 120D, a cheap yet somewhat irrelevant car featured in GT4 to GT6. Then a few Mazdas including the Altezza and the Demio in GT7. Again, cheap but somewhat irrelevant. But let's make things more interesting. Did you know that there are 2 hydrogen-powered cars in Gran Turismo? The first being the Hyundai Vision GT in GT7. Although powered by hydrogen, it wasn't very special. It was quite fast, but then also not very useful. But there was a hydrogen-powered car before that, and to look at this we have to go back in time to GT4, the Toyota Triathlon race car. Now, many of you would have won this car as one of the first prize cars you get in GT4. However, due to it not being allowed to compete in races, many of you would have simply overlooked it. But let's talk about it. It only has one gear and it drives very similar to an electric car, albeit a bit of an older one. It does in fact sound like an electric car, but as we have previously established earlier, GT4 car sounds aren't really anything to go by. It's quite fast for a car with only 266 horsepower, 0 to 60 in around 5 seconds and a top speed of 193 miles per hour. Not too far off the 900 horsepower Gilet that we talked about earlier. Considering Mitsubishi Evos and Subaru Imprezas have more horsepower and cannot achieve nearly these figures, means it is actually quite fast. But then again, it is more aerodynamic than those cars. Whether its good performance is related to its fuel type, that's up for discussion. And it would be nice to see some more hydrogen powered cars in the series. Honda, Toyota and Hyundai have made a series of mass produced hydrogen cars, but besides that there isn't really many hydrogen cars that would fit in the series. However, I could see the introduction of bioethanol cars into the series, namely with the introduction of Koenigsegg, if we are lucky. Now I hope you did enjoy. I've got a part 2 coming to this video where we'll talk about things that you didn't know but not specifically related to cars in this series but other things. If you'd like to see that, make sure you like this video to let me know you enjoyed it. Check out the Patreon like I mentioned earlier and I'll see you all next time. Thanks for watching.